So once again, the keyboard command that you can use in NetBeans, and by the way, in Eclipse, I believe you have these keyboard, I'm not sure if they're exactly the same, but in Eclipse there as well, is Control-Shift plus or Control-Shift minus will expand or collapse your code comments and your code methods and things like that. In other words, the little things along the side that have the plus minus can be instantly brought in and out that way. And sometimes that's, again, a good idea because when we step back and look at a class from this perspective, we get a better understanding of the main components of a class. So again, to review, are those properties and the methods, right? The properties are what it can do, okay? So they're essentially, or sorry, the methods are things it can do, or its actions, might be another way of looking at it, or its verbs. And the properties are things about the class, okay, or essentially variables and things like that, okay, or adjectives, badly spelled, okay. So here's the first class we made back before the break was something called classes example, and it just has one method, main. So it has one action, main, and all main does is it does stuff, okay? So now I switch over to our person class. And I'm going to pull back a little bit. Now this one we spent a lot more time on before the break. So here we can see a lot more of what's going on here. A person has these properties, right? It has, that looks like poop. That should say prop. Okay. Properties. Okay. It has the name, the age, the gender, and the Boolean to determine whether or not this person is alive. And then all of these are methods. They're actions. Okay. And these first three that all just use the word person were things we called constructor methods. Those are methods that are used when you build the class. How do I incorporate it? And we had three of them because it incorporated a feature that we learned in the methods unit called overloading, which is writing the same method name with different parameters. And again, hopefully now, having done the methods unit 2 units ago, words like parameter and overloading make more sense to you. And hopefully, again, if you took something like pre-cal math and you were doing like f of x functions, parameters and functions and methods, kind of that's all coming together. That's where the mathematical theory, because math is a very theory-based course, is now actually applying in a more realistic way. Okay? Because in computer science, we're making actual stuff. We're making programs. So this theory in math is now being applied more practically in computer science. Okay? Now, of course, you can apply that theory in things like solving mathematical type problems, like, you know, Joey has 5 cats. One of Joey's cats gets run over by a truck. How many cats does Joey have, right? Sure, those are practical mathematical applications of the theory, but this is cooler because we're making games and stuff. So anyways, so it's a more sort of stretched out way, because I know when a lot of you guys study math, you realize that not a lot of it is going to have that practical application. But if you've taken courses like physics, or you take computer science, then you realize that that can actually be connected to a more realistic environment. Okay, so now, I can now expand all those methods. And I know we didn't during class, but I took the time to comment them each one, right? So you kind of have a feel for what each method does. There isn't a keyboard command for this, but there's a right-click way to do this as well, that you can take code folds and collapse all Java code, which collapses the method, but not the comment. And sometimes that's useful to you. That's, again, that theory known as black box programming. That this is a magical black box. This method does something magical. I don't want to even look at what it does, because all I need to do is read this to understand, that's what it does, right? So here, person, string name, Ismail, age. This is a constructor for the class. The name is their name, the ismail is their gender, and the age is their age. So in theory, if that works, if what goes on inside this black box actually does what it's supposed to, I should be able to construct a person that way. Similarly, if I go further down, and I look at, say, the talk method, it's when the person speaks. So now when we went back to here, and if I take a look inside of main, at the end of where we wrapped up before the break, we made a person called Napoleon. We gave them that name. We set that gender and that age. And when Napoleon talks, that should be built into the construction of that person. So that Napoleon as a person would talk with that name. And it does. If I run it, that will work. We tested that before the break. So all of that now starts to come together. And then we wrapped before the break by just introducing the brand new concept of inheritance. And here's how that works. Okay? So we're going to start here today. We're now going to build a class called student. And a student is an extension of the person class. So we made a class called person. It's a big, beautiful class. It's got built into it all kinds of stuff like talking and being born and dying and having sex change operations. The people filming in the room right now are probably wondering what the hell's going on. And now we've made a student class. But the student class is a person. A student is a person. And that's implemented through this piece of code right here. That will allow this thing called inheritance to take place. And it's related now to the science of biology, because in biology we talk about inheritance, right? You inherited traits from your parents, right? If your parents were tall, you are most likely tall. If your parents had red hair, both of them, you might inherit the red hair from your parents, right? So inheritance is bringing in features from your parents. Well, the person is the class that parents the student. It's the parent of the student. So students will inherit all the features from person. So it inherits the name, the age, the gender. It also inherits the abilities, right? If your parents were both really good athletes, you might be a very good athlete. Now, it's not guaranteed, but you might inherit those traits, right? So if your parents were good at music, it's possible you might inherit some of those creative traits. That's inheritance in action in biology, and we're seeing the same thing in computer science. But like your parents, you tend to expand on that. It's like, yeah, I know I inherited my parents' athletic abilities, but I want to do more than that. So what I want to do right now is let's extend the student by thinking, what does students have? What does every student have that persons don't necessarily have? What extra things, what extra properties do students have? Can you think of anything right now? What does a student have? As a student, because you guys are all students, you have some things. Great, okay? So let's give, I'm going to sit down, we'll do some coding now. Let's give our student some of those properties. Okay? Now if I just put grades, how would we represent that in the computer science world? Well, generally, you guys have all your grades combined into something called a grade point average. Do you know that? GPA. So we could make that, and we could make that into, is that a good choice, do you think? You think int's a good choice for grade point average? Ah, yeah, something more decimal. Let's go with double. Float, yes, float would actually be better, but let's go with a double. And our GPA. You guys okay with GPA? You understand what that is? It's a grade point average. We could call this grade point average, but I'm not feeling like typing too much today. Now, before the word double, we can add a modifier to this. Do you remember what the two modifiers were to change The visibility of that feature, of that property. Public and private, right. If I put the word private in front of it, what that means is now the GPA is locked away from the outside. It's created a barrier. So I cannot change the GPA directly from the outside. And think about it, from a design standpoint, that's probably a good idea. You can't right now just decide to change your GPA. Right? Despite the want to do that, you can't just instantly will yourself to have a higher GPA. There has to be a way that that happens, a mechanism through which that occurs, but you can't just actively change that. Okay, what else does it, let's put at least one more thing on there. We could put, for example, all the courses you're taking, or we could put what grade you're in. I mean, there's lots of things. Just like when we did the person class, we could have made eye color and all that stuff, but how about let's pick something very simple. Let's make something else that's private. We'll make it an integer. And we'll make your student number. Everyone has one. You guys all have a student number. That's like one of the most important things the office uses to track you, right? When you apply to a university or to community college or when you get mark transcripts, they're all based on your student number. You're a number. I once heard a famous person say, quote, you know how famous you are by how many numbers you are. Right? Think about it. When you get a driver's license, it has a number on there. When you get a passport, it has a number on there. When you get a Batman superhero fan club card, it has a number on there, right? All the things that are numbers are what you are. And as you've been growing and advancing in age, you've been acquiring more and more numbers. When you get to be 45 like me, you got so many numbers, it's crazy, okay? Bank account numbers, mortgage numbers, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, employee numbers. Some of them you'll memorize. Your social insurance number. I bet you some of you have it memorized. I have mine memorized. Okay? But numbers. And student number is one of them. Okay. So now, if we go back to main, we were thinking about this before the break. We made a person called Pedro as a new student. And now, these are the new features of what it is to be a student. Okay? So, we've built a class. Let's build a constructor for this class. Okay, so a couple quick things. Constructor is a method. It has the same name as the class, so this method will be called student. But constructors are very, very special in that they do not have a return type, not even the word void. So we never put anything right here, not even the word void. That's what signals that it's a constructor. As well, it signals it by saying this and this are exactly the same spelling and the same word. That tells Java that this is a constructor method. Okay, so I'm building a student. So let's set their GPA. What should their GPA be? Well, let's set it to 0, right? They started off at 0. They should have no GPA when they're first constructed. And what should their student number be? Well, let's give it 0 as well, okay? Which is kind of useless. Building a student with a 0 GPA and a 0 student number, that's pointless. So I'm actually going to avoid this constructor. The default constructor is what it's called when you have no parameters, and give it the parameters. Because think about it, when you register at Sturgeon Heights, they will right away give you a student number. Like, it's not like you're going to wait to do that. So I'm going to pass a student number to this method right away and assign it right away. But I instantly have a problem right here. So this line right here is generating an issue right now. And I'm going to throw this out as the very first review type question. Who remembers the way to resolve this? Jesse? That's right. This dot. Remember, this is the keyword that makes a reference to what will be the instance of the class later on. This dot. Perfect. That's resolved. Okay? But we actually have one other little issue here. This looks good. It says when I construct a student, so think about it. Imagine you're Java, and you see this line of code. Student Pedro equals new student, which by the way now is screwing up. Why is it screwing up? There's no argument, that's right. There's no argument here. So let's put an argument right there. Let's give student, I don't know, give me a student number. Give him 101. So he's going to be student 101. Okay? So I go to build Pedro. The number 101 is passed into there. So it will give Pedro the value 101. It'll give him a GPA of 0. But there's something else being assumed right here. It's also assuming when it builds a student that it also builds a person. It's assuming that, but we actually need to put a little bit of code in there to be that a little more explicit with that. Okay? So to do that, we're going to add one more line to our constructor, and it has to be the first line. Can't be in the middle or it can't be the last. And it's a special keyword, super. Notice it puts it in blue. Super is a reference to what's called the superclass. The superclass is the parent class. In C# they use the word base for the base class. I like the word super because it makes me feel like really important. But I'm also going to put this. Okay? And let's take a look at what that kind of would mean. So the fact that I put round brackets on there indicates that it's some kind of method. So let's think what's going on here. I called the constructor. I passed the number 101 into that variable. But then it does this, super, which means go to the superclass. Well, this is the superclass right here, person. Go away. And now we're here in the superclass. It finds a constructor with no parameters, which is this one right here. And it runs its code. And our code happens to call a method called birth, which comes down here. And it happens to assign those values. It says the name is nothing, the age is nothing, is male is false, and is alive is true. So it sets those variables by default when it runs that line right there. So that's where it constructed the person now. So when it built a student, it first went in and built up a person. Then it sets the GPA to 0. Then it sets the student number to 101. So that's pretty useful. And that's the call to the superclass. So then the next thing we said we were supposed to do is after building this student called Pedro, which by the way, he'll have no name, right? Because it's calling the person default constructor, which doesn't actually assign it a name or anything, and a gender. So I don't know if you guys remember, but if I run this code, and it might take a second because it's been a week since NetBeans ran on this computer, but we'll see how that goes. There we go. And you can see here on the last line, my name is, and it has a blank, my age is 0, and if you think of a male, the answer is false, because it's setting all those default values. But now we're going to do something interesting. After that constructor, we're going to write a public void method called talk. Well, wait a minute. We can already talk. We inherited that ability from the person class. Why do I need to do it again? I already can talk. Well, here's an interesting feature about inheritance. You can write methods of the same name as the parent class, and it does something special. It's not overloading, which is where you have two methods of the same name but different parameters, because I don't have any parameters here. So it's the identical method name. This is called overriding. not overloading, but overriding, which means it overrides the other method called talk with this method. So instead of calling the one in the person class, what instead it does is it's going to call this one. So I could go, you know, hey, like that. And now when a student talks, if I run this code, they say that. It overrides the other version. Okay, now I don't want it to say that, but let's see. What would a person, or sorry, what would a student sound like when they talk? Well, depending on the class, they'd say lots of silly stuff. But let's have them say something like, and I'll put a new line in there. My student number is student number. And then another new line. My GPA is GPA. Okay? So let me pull back, shrink that up a bit. Okay, so that's what I'm going to have them do, is they're going to talk this way. My student number is this, and my GPA is that. So I'm going to run that. And you can see there, student number is 101, GPA is 0.0. It works. But I'd also like it to say the stuff that it did before as well. Now that I've overridden talk with this method, I wish that I kind of didn't. I wish that I could still say my name is blah, blah, blah. Well, we can do both. Because the other thing I'm going to do inside this talk method is I'm going to use the word super, and I'm going to put dot talk. And I want you to think about what's going on here for 1 second. When I talk as a student, because remember, that's what class I'm in right now. I'm in the student class. The very first thing I do is I talk as a person, because the superclass for this is person. So it calls that method first, super.talk. Then it writes this one. So you can do some really interesting stuff if you get a grip on kind of what's going on here with these classes, the way that's happening. But now you can see it's running that line right there where my name is, and it's still blank, but we're going to fix that in a second. And I don't like that extra new line, so I'm going to take that new line out right there, just because I forgot that we put a new line at the end anyway. So there we go. My name is this. And actually, I'm going to add one more thing. I'm going to put a little tab character on that, just to make it look pretty. So here we go. There we go. My name is, and my age is, and the answer is false. Then it adds those 2 extra lines at the end. My student number is, and my GPA is. Okay, so I'm adding a little bit of functionality to this so that a student has more abilities than a person. And I would think that you guys do have more abilities than your average, just generic person who's never been a student. Okay, now, I don't like this constructor still. It's still not quite where I want it to be, because I'd like to actually, going back to here, be able to construct a person, not just with the student number, but with a name and a gender and an age and a student number. So I could do this, I don't know, what's Pedro's last name? Who's the Napoleon Dynamite fan is in here that we were using this video? Anyone know what Pedro's? Make up a name. What's Pedro's last name going to be? Think of something very sort of Latin, Mexican sort of flavor. That's easy to spell. Garcia, I like that. Pedro Garcia. So Pedro Garcia, the student, will be a male. That's what the true represents. He'll be 17, and his student number will be 101. But right now it's broken, because our constructor can't handle all those parameters. Yet. Can't yet. But we're about to fix that. And we can actually have NetBeans do some of the work for us here. If we want to, we could actually use the light bulb here. And you can see what it suggests. It says, hey, you want me to make this constructor for you? Sure, you do it for me. So I'm going to click on it. And now over in the student class, it built it up for me. Well, it started to anyways. Now, it's not the best at doing this job. It doesn't know what to call this, so it called it Pedro Garcia. I'm just going to call it name. It didn't know what to call the Boolean, so it just called it Boolean B. I'm going to call it Ismail. This I would be the age, and this thing would be the student number. Okay? Now, it now needs to incorporate all those parameters into the construction of this student. So if I look at the code from above, the other constructor, and I just stole those 3 lines of code and put them down here, it would be a good start. But what else could I do to repair this? What do you think? Close, but remember, when it calls the person constructor up here, it's going to call birth automatically. But wait a minute. We have more than one constructor in the person class, don't we? We have this one right here as well, which is exactly the one I need. And all I got to do is pass to the superclass the name, the Ismail, and the age. Because now it will look for, in the superclass, a constructor that takes 3 parameters, and we happen to have that constructor. So now I'm going to run it, and oop, we got an error. Wait, let me just quickly take a look. Name, yeah, we got that. Pulled successful. Let's try it again. There we go. My name is Pedro Garcia. My age is 17. And if you think I'm a male, the answer is true. My student number is 101. My GPA is 0.0. It's perfect. It is given more functionality. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, I am right now, I don't even need this one. I don't think I'm ever going to just build a generic student with a student number. There's nobody registered in this school that's just called student. So I actually think I'm going to delete this constructor. And now you can think from a design perspective. As a builder of a class, you can build constructors that are specific to your needs. And if you don't want to have them be able to construct things like generically, then don't give them that constructor. Like in the person class, we had this default constructor that just builds a person with a name. But they will automatically be female and they will automatically be 0 years old. We also had this one. And all that one does is it just builds a person with no name, 0 age, and female. Now it's possible that the person class, that's a useful constructor. Because we can maybe just build a generic person. But with student, let's not give our users of this class the ability to do that. So the only way to make a student is by giving it a name, a gender, an age, etc. You are in total control of this. You are the builders of this class, and so you decide what it can do. Okay. Now we have one property that isn't changing right now, GPA. GPA isn't changing. So let's change that, right? How does a student change their GPA? Let's write a method to do that. A public void method. I put it under talk. Well, I can think about a way you can change your GPA. You could study. You could study hard, and that would change your GPA. So your GPA would be equal to your GPA. Now we could just go like +1 or something like that, but it's kind of a more complicated formula. So let's try something like GPA plus 0.1 times 2, or something like that. So when we study, our GPA will go up a little bit. Now, there's also a way to make your GPA go down a little bit, right? So let's write a little method, a public method, void method called slack off. So if we slack off, okay, actually, no, let's make it more specific to this class. Let's call this go online. That's a way you can bring down your GPA. Go online. internet throws you off. And how does that work? Well, your GPA equals your GPA minus 0.1. Whoops, 0.1. Keep it kind of simple, a little bit easier. So studying makes your GPA go up more, and slacking off or going online makes it go down a little bit less. Okay? Now, we're going to add one more. Occasionally, you guys can raise your GPA all in a week through this magical method that students have found, called cramming. We're going to cram. And to cram, we're going to run a little loop, a little 0 to 10 loop, and do a lot of studying. Do a lot of studying here at the last minute by cramming. So here are 3 abilities I've just given a student. I give them the ability to study, to go online, or to slack off, and then at the last minute they can just cram. And cramming takes their studying and just ramps it up by 10. And that's really what you guys do, right? You do that kind of stuff. You study, you go online, and you cram. Let's test these methods. Let's go back to here, pedro.talk. Let's go pedro.study. And then let's have Pedro talk again. So what will Pedro's GPA be like after he studies? Well, we can run our code to find out. Look at that. It went from 0.0 to 0.2. So he raised his GPA. Now let's have Pedro dot go online. So Pedro all of a sudden loves the internet. Then let's have Pedro talk again. Let's see how that tests out. So it went from 0.0 to 0.2 down to 0.1. His GPA dropped by going online. And then finally, let's have Pedro.cram. And then Pedro, talk. And let's see how that sort of plays out in our little story here. So he went from 0.0 to 0.2 to 0.1 to 307.0. That's a crazy GPA. That's actually not even an accurate GPA, but it does work. So the moral of the story, kids, is cramming can make a big difference before you talk. Okay? Studying over and over and over again in a concentrated period can actually make a big difference. Okay, so that's how you can incorporate some of this stuff. Now, I'd love to do the experiment we did before where we just pull in a random student, but I think we're going to stop there for today. And I went a bit long.